Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. New York has seen a series of protest demonstrations following the deaths at the hands of police officers of Eric Garner on Staten Island and Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The city then went through the trauma of the cold-blooded assassination of two police officers by a deranged man who shot them while they were sitting in their patrol car and then killed himself. Those killings lit the fuse of a continuing and bitter controversy that has pitted angry police officers against Mayor Bill DeBlasio. We are fortunate this week to be able to explore this complex and potentially dangerous state of affairs with the Borough President of Brooklyn, Eric Adams, who graduated at the top of his class at the Police Academy in 1984 and spent 22 years as an officer with the NYPD. Eric, how are you?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in today.
And it should be a footnote. I graduated at the top, not because of brilliance, endurance.
Endurance, right? Which is really an important issue. When I talk on college campuses, I tell college kids this: persistence, endurance, discipline is really important, right?
No, so true, so true.
But I'm sure a certain amount of brilliance too. So you've been obviously on both sides of this sort of thing, both as a police officer within the department and as a public official. How do we begin to sort out this unfortunate situation? For example, do the cops have a legitimate grievance with Mayor DeBlasio? What's going on there?
Well, the first order, I believe, is to understand that it's complex. Many people think that there's a very simplistic response to how do we have public safety and how do we ensure that our police officers are safe, and it's not. It is extremely complex, particularly when you police in certain communities and what you bring to those policing environments. And if we don't identify all of them, then we're going to be in this constant state of just debating with each other, not coming to resolutions.
Now, you recently wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times that carried the headline, "We must stop police abuse of black men." Now, I've covered a tremendous amount over the years of unwarranted violence by police officers. I do not contend that that's the norm by any means, but there has been a great deal of it. But if you talk to police officials, they will almost always tell you that there is very little excessive force used by cops and almost no racial profiling. This conflicts with sort of what I've seen in my career. What's the truth there?
Well, it's more than what you or I or anyone else has witnessed. The facts speaks for themselves. And the reality is, as I am attempting to show as we have these conversations, is that a police officer, he or she leaves their command with a toolbox full of tools to go and fight crime or correct conditions. They use the full scope of those tools in certain communities. And in other communities, they only pull out their hammer. They immediately go to this use of force. And I think that it's not so much racist as much as a racial society that we live in. When a police officer is recruited from that society, he goes into the police academy with these racial stereotypes and understanding. And no one trains him in the police academy how to deal with that and how to address that. So they go on the patrol with the misunderstanding that you can just go into a multicultural, multi-diverse community and just police based on what you know when you didn't address some real issues that impact us all.
Now, you addressed that specifically in your op-ed article. You wrote, and this is a quote, "One of my white fellow officers told me that if he saw a white individual with a gun, he took extra care for himself and the individual. When he saw a black individual with a gun, he took care only for himself." Now, the double standard could hardly be more stark or explicit than it was in that paragraph. If the situation is that bad, how do we begin to change it, and who needs to take the lead here?
And I remember one case in particular in the Transit Authority where a white male entered the system armed with a gun, and the officers saw him and approached him in a very casual manner because, again, they thought white male equals law enforcement plus
Right.
a gun. When one sees a black male or Hispanic person, they think immediately gun, person of color equal criminal. So that misconception or that predisposition can not only harm the innocent person, but you can also endanger the officer. So our training must really focus on the fact that when we come into law enforcement, we're coming in with years and years of what we believe is the definition of a criminal and the definition of an innocent person. And many of our officers, Bob, which is interesting, they come from communities where it's a monolithic community. Not only white officers, even black officers. Many black officers may have grew up in South Jamaica, Queens, Brownsville, Bedford-Stuyvesant, have no interaction with Asians, no interaction with Hasidic Jews, no interaction with Italians. And so until we understand that we're leaving a monolithic community and now we have to police in a diverse community, we have to be trained to acknowledge that and leave the area of denial. Policing believe that we don't see color, we only see crimes. That is not a reality. Right. Human beings acknowledge what they see in front of them, and we have to deal with that.
So you mentioned the incidents where an officer might see a white fellow with a gun and they think perhaps he's an officer. But we've seen these so-called friendly fire incidents where African-American police officers have actually been fired upon by white officers who saw them and didn't realize that they were police officers. So the question becomes, you say that it's a question of training, the question becomes who should be responsible for initiating this training? If we have it now, we don't have enough of it. And who should take the lead politically, even outside of the police department?
And we don't have enough of it because it has never been acknowledged before. It has been ignored. And I use the analogy that our law enforcement community across the globe, particularly here in America, we suffer from abuse, law enforcement abuse, intoxication. And anytime you're taking those steps towards sobriety, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge it. We have failed to acknowledge it. Finally, I believe Mayor DeBlasio, Police Commissioner Bratton, and Deputy Commissioner Julian, they're looking at, we have to acknowledge that we have a problem and take steps towards sobriety, and that is looking at how we treat police interactions based on what communities we are in. And I think we're on the way to doing that. And it starts in the police academy, very real, honest training and how to go out and deal with policing. And then reinforcement, because anyone that tells you that goes through any form of getting rid of some form of addiction, you know that it doesn't mean because you do a 3-day training that all of a sudden you're not going to have some of those same problems that got you in trouble in the first place. It's the constant retraining so that people don't get caught up in the everyday life of answering jobs on the street.
Now, this is an unusual posture for a high-ranking elected official in the city to take. Why has this not hurt you or hindered you politically, do you think?
Well, I think because people know that during my time and days in the police department, a career that I loved, I enjoyed so much being a cop. I just thought that there's no other type of profession I wanted to do. Studying to get promoted in the department, moving up from a sergeant, a lieutenant, and then a captain was a dream come true for me. And when people knew how much I enjoyed the career, but I was willing to critique the career because I wanted to make it better. I thought the uniform and the badge stood for something. And because I was so vociferous about police reform as a police officer, then when I got into government and became a state senator and then the borough president, I was able to critique policing because people knew that I was coming from a very honest and authentic position of making the department better.
Now, this issue of excessive police violence, you experienced firsthand. You were a victim of police violence when you were just a teenager. Can you tell us about that?
I was 15 years old at the time. I was arrested for criminal trespassing. And after the arrest, I was assaulted by police officers who, kicked me in my groin area repeatedly. And when you think about it, you could assault someone all over the body, but to focus on that area, I thought there was other significant connotations behind it. And, for days, Bob, I urinated blood, and I was concerned. Even today, when I think about when my son was born, how I was relieved because I actually thought I would never be able to have children. And to see his birth was, it relieved me of some of the demons. And, it's amazing some of the demons you have inside you. And so I had a demon in me. And the only way I could get it out was to go in.
To go into the police department.
Go into the police department.
Is that the reason you wanted to be a cop?
Well, it was a combination. Reverend Herbert from the House of Lords Church, he was one of the driving forces that recruited some young people to become law enforcement members after there was a terrible shooting in our community. And I jumped at the chance because I realized it was my opportunity to deal with some of those very significant issues that I was dealing with in police reform. You
haven't just talked about these issues. I mean, you were very proactive even when you were in the department. You were one of the co-founders of the group, 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I believe you were once the president of the Grand Council of the Guardians. Can you tell us what those two organizations were and what they were trying to achieve?
Significant legacies, the Roger Abels and so many other men and women who came before me that paved the way for those of us in law enforcement. They were extremely progressive. They wanted diversity in the police department. They wanted to ensure that police officers were treated fairly, but also treated the people fairly. In addition to that, what was important about those organizations is that they paved the way. They were a voice. When you looked around Dr. King, when he did his speech in Washington, D.C., present was members of the Guardians Association. They played a very important role in our community. The problem that I'm feeling now is many of our young people who are of color and they are wearing a police uniform or law enforcement uniform, they don't really understand the legacy and they're not present in the moment, and history is not going to be kind to them because many people are asking, where are the black cops, where are the Hispanic cops during this time?
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, why we don't hear more voices from African-American police officers and other officers of color when we have some of these terrible situations developing. So you say that they don't know a great deal about the history, but there must be something else at work now because they're aware of what's going on right now. Why aren't they speaking up?
Well, I think that many of them, and I have had several conversations with active law enforcement officers to talk about this, because many of them believe they don't have the authority to do so, and if they do so, they would be ostracized. The police department is a paramilitary organization, and many who are there have a desire to fit in. And many of the commanders and those who are the policymakers, they have a low tolerance for those who they consider to be a dissenting voice. You have to push against that discomfort, and you have an obligation, I believe, as a person of color and as a professional, to talk about those issues that impact how you do your job and how you're perceived by the public.
Now, Mayor DeBlasio campaigned on the whole issue of police reform. He was opposed to the whole problem of stop and frisk, which you recognized as a problem long ago. So did I. He was elected by a wide margin, and yet he's done a few things that have really teed off a lot of police officers. One was he had, I guess there was a meeting where Reverend Al Sharpton played a prominent role, and the police officers were not happy about that. Some cops were not happy because Mayor DeBlasio said publicly that he had had a conversation with his son, who is of mixed race heritage, about how he should behave if he's in an encounter with the police department. Given everything that's gone on, how well or not well do you think the mayor has handled this whole situation?
I believe he has done a great job. I think that these are and will continue to be extremely uncomfortable conversations. We had 20 years, 8 years of Mayor Giuliani, 12 years of Mayor Bloomberg, of one style of policing that was extremely divisive. When you look at how we did the marijuana policy, young people smoked marijuana in Park Slope or Park Place in Brooklyn, as well as on Park Avenue, Manhattan, yet the form of enforcement was clearly in one area. I think that Mayor DeBlasio touched on very difficult conversations, and we need to lean into our discomfort. We're going to come out the other side as better human beings and better people, and we can't avoid these conversations.
Now, the flip side is has been the behavior of the police officers since the two officers were murdered, which was a reprehensible event, but I don't know of anyone who thinks otherwise. I mean, across the board, people recognize this as a terrible tragedy. But police officers have since then have demonstrated, protested against the mayor, turned their backs on the mayor on a number of occasions. There was a police slowdown for a while. As a former police officer, what's been your reaction to that?
Unfortunate, particularly the actions that were displayed while in uniform. When you wear that uniform, you are like the Lady Justice where you have a blindfold on. You don't concern yourself with who's the mayor, who's the president. You carry out your job. Police officers have two awesome rights, to take life and to take freedom. With that, you abdicate other rights, such as when you have that uniform on, you do not protest or demonstrate in any manner, no matter how much pain you are experiencing. You are professional, and you can never give the signal that there's a disengagement from the commander-in-chief, who's the mayor, and the rank-and-file police officers who provide public safety.
Now, you mentioned that the department is a paramilitary organization. Mayor DeBlasio is, in fact, the commander-in-chief. I used to be in the Army. If we had done anything like turning our backs on the commander-in-chief, there would have been, swift discipline in the Army. Are you surprised that officers were not disciplined, and do you think anyone should have been disciplined for that kind of behavior?
Yes, I was. I was extremely surprised. That was, in my opinion, that is unacceptable. And you cannot have a breakdown in a line of authority, because many of the calls you make as a public service, a public safety person, is an immediate call, and the rank and file must know you follow orders. If there's a disagreement on the order, that's something you deal with at a later time. And I thought someone should have been disciplined. Particularly, there were officers who were supervisors who were also turning their back on the mayor at both funerals. To me, that's unacceptable. That could never happen again in New York City.
Meanwhile, we've had the protests that were going on for a long time. They've waned somewhat since the tragedy of the police officers being killed. How effective do you think the protests have been? Do you think that they've been making progress in achieving their objectives?
I subscribe to the belief that there are three levels of change. One is agitation. Second is negotiation, and the third is legislation. I think the protesters have done an admirable job of having a righteous protest. These are the grandchildren of the civil rights movement, and I believe there's a numerical minority that has really gotten in the way of really shaping the narrative, but without them, the overwhelming number of protesters have really been, should be commended for peacefully voicing how you should raise your voice in America. And I think we're in a good place. Without them, I don't believe we will have witnessed some of the clear movement towards real police reform. And even those protesters who assaulted the two lieutenants on the Brooklyn Bridge, it was protesters who came forward and assisted the police in identifying the wrongdoers. And so we should really look at what happened here in New York. Not Ferguson. I thought Ferguson was too much violence. You can't say Black Lives Matter while you're shooting from rooftops. You can't have it both ways. If Black lives matter and white lives matters and lives matter, I believe all lives matter, and you have to do it in a peaceful fashion. If not, you're going to really destroy your message.
The police have not been all in agreement on this issue by any means, and we've seen at least one meeting where Pat Lynch, who's the president of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, got into an argument with some other police officials. He's also going to be challenged for his leadership of that union. What is going on inside the department? Do you have some sense of that? Is there a split in the department among officers who are clearly upset with the mayor and maybe other officers who feel that the police protests have gone too far?
Yeah, and I don't share the belief that Pat Lynch has been a bad union leader. I think Pat Lynch has been a good union leader. I think he represents the concerns of his union members, and which is important. That's the job of a union leader. Where we disagree is that I don't believe the PBA should direct policy. That's the role of the mayor and the police commissioner. And sometimes I think those lines get blurred. And there's always going to be a split. There are different opinions on who's at fault for the lack of union contracts, who's at fault for the lack of public safety. But when you really look at it, the mayor has done a good job around the camera issues, supplying cameras and technologies for police officers, as well as being there for them when it is needed. We have a new police academy in the Bronx that's going to be the state of the art with some of the best training. And so what may appear as a split within the police department, as I said weeks ago when the slowdown took place, these are professionals. It's one of the best, well-trained police departments on the globe. They're going to come around and realize their job and role is public safety, and they're going to get back to doing that in according to their duties.
Now, you had a terrific career in the police department, and then you left the department and went into politics. What prompted that decision? What made you want to get into politics?
Because you can't really sit outside and look through the window and watch people around the table making policies that you are concerned about. And I saw firsthand of the lack of quality education, how it impacts on a child's life. And I realized that, you know, even when we talk about domestic violence or gun violence, the over-proliferation of guns in our streets, I knew that if you want to impact change, I couldn't be just a captain in one precinct, in one geographical area. I had to go into the department, into the politics to do so. And so when I was elected state senate, I was able to not only complain about stop and frisk, I was able to pass legislation that impacted stop and frisk. I was able to vote on the campaign of fiscal equity and talk about how do we bring resources to our community. So instead of complaining, as I tell young people all the time in colleges, get involved. You cannot win the game if you're in the bleachers. Get on the field with everyone else. Get dirty, get hit, get struck, but keep moving the ball down the field. And I thought I had an opportunity to do so in politics, and I'm happy that I did.
I couldn't agree more about the idea of you want more civic engagement among young people. I think that that's just so important. I think that's one of the most important things about the police protest. The issues, obviously, that they're protesting are very important issues, but the mere fact that they're involved, I think, is very important. So you were in the state senate.
Yes.
Now you're the borough president of Brooklyn.
Yes. Clearly
an obviously ambitious fellow. What's next on the agenda for Eric Adams?
Well, I think that, you know, just as when I was a cop, a probationary cop, moving up through the ranks, studying hard, going to school at night, my associates, my bachelor's and my master's, all was done at night. It took me about 14 years to do so, learning each step of the way. I want to spend the next 8 years of learning how to run the borough, 2.6 million people, the largest borough. And then I want to take a crack at City Hall. You know, I believe that with my law enforcement experience, my state experience, my experience in Brooklyn Borough Hall, I think I can have an opportunity of being a mayor in the city of New York. That is my dream. You know, you can't merely lay down and go to sleep and dream and expect for it to happen. I have to earn it the old-fashioned way, and I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to give it a good try and accomplish that skill.
But isn't it unusual for politicians usually say, well, I'm focused on this job, I'm going to do this and that for the next several years, and then, you know, I'm not really looking ahead. Well, you obviously are looking ahead. Isn't it unusual for someone to say that I really would like in the future to take a crack at the mayoralty?
Well, I think two things. Yes, it is unusual, but one, I wouldn't hire a young attorney who wants to become a partner one day if he states he just wants to be an associate. I wouldn't hire a doctor that doesn't have a vision or dream to run his own practice, or a teacher that doesn't want to be a principal. And we can continue to tell children to reach for the sky when we are afraid or ashamed to say what our dreams and aspirations are. Second, I don't think the public no longer want leaders who are not clear and focused on what they want to do. People just really want honesty. They want you to look them in their eyes, shake their hand, and tell them exactly what your thoughts and your plans are. It doesn't mean you will accomplish everything, but I just think there's a different form of leadership that is needed. Our leaders of today must play the entire game with a no-huddle offense and still move the ball down the field, no matter what the distractions are in the stands.
Eric Adams, Borough President of Brooklyn, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope you'll come back and visit with us again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. We'll be back in a moment with a final word. Wise words amidst the controversy swirling around the police, the mayor, and the many thousands of protesters have come from New York City's police commissioner, Bill Bratton. Even as some cops were turning their backs on Mayor Bill DeBlasio at the funeral of slain officer Rafael Ramos, Bratton was urging all of us to look closely at one another and acknowledge the essential humanity we all share. That includes, he said, and I quote, the police, the people who are angry at the police, the people who support us but want us to be better, even a madman who assassinated two men because all he could see was two uniforms, even though they were so much more. We don't see each other, Bratton said. If we can learn to see each other, to see that our cops are people like Officer Ramos and Officer Liu, to see that our communities are filled with people just like them too, if we can learn to see each other, then when we see each other, we'll heal. We'll heal as a department, we'll heal as a city, we'll heal as a country. That's all for now. See you next time.